We appreciate your participation in this online 2025 Ohio Domestic Action Plan workshop. As you know, Ohio submitted our revised domestic action plan to US EPA in 2024. And we've been having these annual workshops as an opportunity to take a deeper dive into presenting the action items and work being done under the DAP and have a continuous dialogue with all of you, our Lake Erie supporters, to help us improve our collective efforts to reduce nutrients entering the Western Lake Erie Basin. So I know I've said it before, but reducing the nutrient load and meeting the targets under Annex 4 is a complex challenge for all of the parties. And the conversations about how we're going to meet those targets will need to continue at forums like today's. And we welcome your questions and comments today. If we are not able to get through all of that, we certainly would appreciate hearing from you. And so you are always welcome to reach out in the future after today's session or just whenever you're interested in having that dialogue. So Dr. Sandra Kosek-Sills has pulled together another great lineup of presentations for today so that you can hear about the work happening. So Sandra, I am going to turn things back over to you.
Thank you, Joy. All right, so I'm just going to get us kicked off here. I know that most folks, we are familiar with the domestic action plan process, but we're going to just touch very briefly on what we're going to try to get through today, and then I'll just say a few words about what's in the domestic action plan. So we're going to go in two major pieces. The first one will be talking about implementation of actions under the Ohio Domestic Action Plan, give you a brief overview, and then we'll go through our three agencies, Department of Agriculture, DNR, and Ohio EPA, and then we'll do a little question and answer on the implementation piece. And then we have as our guest presenter today, Santina Wertman of US EPA's Great Lakes National Program Office, who's going to bring us up to date with the latest information from Annex 4 and other agencies on the status of the resource. And then I'll just wrap up a little bit at the end. So just as a reminder, we are focusing in Ohio's Domestic Action Plan on 4 key sets of actions. The first one is agricultural best management practices. The second one is wetland restoration and enhancements. The third one is community support. That includes water treatment, NPDES permittees, home sewage treatment system remediation, other outreach to communities. And the fourth piece is watershed planning, and that includes looking at how the loads are distributed across the Maumee River watershed and other aspects of watershed planning. And I'm just going to make a quick note here that I do have a point-by-point actions table that goes along with the domestic action plan. It pulls out in table form all of the actions that we committed to under the DAP 2023, and it gives a little update for each one of those. So that was recently updated, and it's on our Ohio DAP 2023 website. Some of the additional actions that we have, we're looking at TMDLs, that's our total maximum daily loads for the Maumee River watershed TMDL, but also other pieces of that, and then a range of support actions, the monitoring, tracking, reporting, research, modeling, and outreach. And then we have also been working with various partners, and I have some information on tracking partner actions. That one I don't have up to date, but I did update the state's worksheet. And next, I am going to turn it over to Terry Mesher with Ohio Department of Agriculture to talk about what ODA has been up to lately in support of Ohio's Domestic Action Plan. You ready to go, Terry?
Yes, I am. Give me a second. I'll pull up my presentation.
I see it.
Yeah. Sandra, okay. I'm going to go into slideshow mode, and well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Terry Mesher. I work with the for the Ohio Department of Agriculture. I manage their H2 Ohio program. And with that said, I guess go a little bit over what we've been doing and a little bit of a look back on where we've been with H2 Ohio to date. So the vast majority of our H2 Ohio programming has been focused in the Western Lake Erie Basin, starting out in 2020 on the Maumee River watershed area. We deliver our programming on the county basis. It makes it simpler for program delivery. In 2022, then we expanded into an additional 10 counties that encompassed all of Western Lake Erie Basin, at least as defined by Ohio Revised Code. Starting in 2024, then we reached out and started some enrollment across the entire state, focusing in on about 500,000 acres of nutrient management plan development. In our statewide effort, that statewide effort was available across 64 counties of the state of Ohio, 64 of the 88. One key partner that we have in all of this is our local soil and water conservation districts. They're the real muscle behind this program. They're the meat and potatoes into delivering this program, engaging local producers, and confirming that those practices are being completed in accordance with our practice standards and guidelines. Our management practices, if we look at ODA's goals with H2 Ohio overall, I think we're fairly fortunate at ODA because our central theme here with anything we do with H2 Ohio is reducing loads coming from working lands. Primarily, our focus has been Western Lake Erie Basin, and that's going to be in row crop agriculture. But when I say loads, I'm talking about reducing sediment, nitrogen, and phosphorus loads coming off of working lands across the rural landscape. Excuse me. Our primary practices that we're focused in on the Maumee and up in the Western Lake Erie Basin are the development of voluntary nutrient management plans. So essentially, that's applying nutrients, be it commercial fertilizers or manure, that is based off of information of a current soil test, a yield goal, and the Tri-State Fertilizer Guide that's been published by Ohio State, Purdue, and Michigan State Universities. Once we have the recommendations and the proper amount of nutrients being applied, then our three supporting practices really go and work towards reducing the potential runoff from those. So we focus in on phosphorus placement, overwintering cover crops, or an overwintering crop such as wheat or forage. And then last and certainly not least is manure incorporation and utilization. Again, all of those practices focused on reducing the likelihood of nutrients and or sediment being washed off of the landscape. If we look at our overall impact for H2 Ohio and where we're at today, we have about a 2.2 million acre footprint across the entire state. I will say that of that 2.2 million acres, 1.8 million acres is in the 24 counties in Northwest Ohio that constitutes all of the Western Lake Erie Basin in Ohio. We have about 3,200 agreements or 3,200 producers participating statewide. If we look at our footprint in the Western Lake Erie Basin, nearly half of that cropland is enrolled in H2 Ohio and has a nutrient management plan that has been reviewed and approved by a local soil and water conservation district or by ODA. And then here in the last 2 years, we've been starting to expand our focus a little bit too on conservation channels. And currently, on the existing agreements and planned projects that we have, both planned and constructed at this point, we have more than 20 miles of conservation ditch and about just a little over 27,000 acres of watershed coming through those projects once they're all completed. These conservation ditches should all be completed by the end of calendar year 2026 based on our current enrollment and our current projections. If we look at what we've done last year, we will be releasing these numbers through our annual report here in the very near future. But our total acres that we have completed practices within the Western Lake Erie Basin, so this is the practices in the 24 county area up in Northwest Ohio, we have completed and implemented nutrient management plans on 1.7 million acres. Those are unique practice acres or unique cropland acres The following 4 practices have all occurred on those 1.7 million acres, but we have a footprint of 1.7 million acres that completed the nutrient management plan. The local soil and water district has verified that they followed the plan. And again, that's 1.7 million acres out of that entire 24 county area. The key thing to note there is probably the precision and the subsurface placement on phosphorus. Pretty high numbers there. If we look at what we paid out in completed practices across those 24 counties in 2024, that comes out to be about $60.5 million that was distributed to producers in across those 24 counties. If we look at our enrollment for this year, for 2025, you'll see that we have just a little bit higher enrollment. We always have some practice acres that either they didn't quite follow the practice right, they couldn't make it work for that field for this year, but we have enrollment of about 1.8 million acres, almost 1.9 million acres for 2025 across those 24 counties. So we're excited about where we're at with that. It's been pretty heavy workload for the soil and water districts up in that part of the state, but we couldn't be more happy with the work that they delivered and the producers that they brought into through the door. This is just a representation of the overall contract density that we have. Obviously, each blue dot represents a farmer participating in H2 Ohio. You can see a heavy concentration up there in Northwest Ohio, as I've stated. In 24, we did offer program enrollment to folks outside of the soil and water or outside of Northwest Ohio. We had a goal of 500,000 acres to be enrolled, and I think currently we're just wrapping up the completion of voluntary nutrient management plan development on about 450 to 460,000 acres in those counties outside of Northwest Ohio. We have been asked by the administration to pull together phosphorus reduction estimates. These are estimates. They're done. They're done internally at ODA. The challenge that we have is we cannot model these estimates at this point in time, just because our overall data that we've had in previous years wasn't high enough quality to really put it through a model. But based on some work and some consultants that we've had in a process that they developed and laid out, our estimate for 2024 was we had the potential for about 420,000 pounds of reduction. I will say, and I will admit to all of you in here, is that the ability to model this is also very limited because we do not necessarily have a good baseline data on where producers were at prior to the H2 Ohio programming. And so again, it's an estimate, but we are very proud with the overall participation and the direction that we've been able to go. I think the key thing here out of this graph is the growth in the program and the growth in the overall implemented practices from 2021 through 2024. And we look to continue that trend as we move forward into 2025 and beyond. I did want to share a few things on soil test phosphorus. I'm going to breeze through these slides fairly quickly. Sandra, I don't want to get real far into the background, but really we thought at ODA is that the first place to reduce nutrient loss was to eliminate nutrient applications that weren't needed to put crops in the barn or to put bushels in the bin, so to speak. So we're really focused on that in the Western Lake Erie Basin, specifically on phosphorus, to try to limit the amount of phosphorus lost as we go through these practices. But what I wanted to share is what we've been able to document. I'm sorry, my slides are acting kind of funny here. But what we've been able to document over time, and with the overall soil tests that we have that have been submitted as part of the H2 Ohio program, is the vast majority of soil tests that we see being submitted through the H2 Ohio program. The vast majority of those are in the management range that we would recommend through the Tri-State Fertilizer Guide. So 78.7% of them are in that management range where we would say, hey, as a farmer, this is where we want you to maintain your soil test. Moving forward, I think we will encourage that 50 parts per million. We encourage producers to manage them at an even lower level than that. But I think this is great data and a great starting point to show some of these trends. And of that, an additional 18.7% or nearly 20% is in that moderate risk of phosphorus loss. So the key take home here is that if we look at the very high risk and the high risk, that makes up less than 3% of the overall soil tests and fields that are in that part of the world. So I think overall, where we're at today, the nutrient management at the high elevation is pretty good. At the watershed level is pretty good. We've also been able to document some other positive trends, and the data that we gleaned out of the My Farms data and our soil test pretty much reflects some research work that was done earlier by Libby Dayton and some other published papers that showed, in general, we have a downward trend in soil tests in this part of the state of Ohio, up in Northwest Ohio, for the past many years. And what we're seeing is overall, if we look at fertilizer sales that are tracked through ODA, and we look at Northwest Ohio, we have seen a drastic reduction in fertilizer sales, specifically phosphorus fertilizer sales in Northwest Ohio over the last 15 to 20 years. If I looked at the data, I would say that we've reduced our overall fertilizer sales by probably close to a third, if not a little bit more. At the same time, we have seen a fairly steady uptick in the average yields across that cropland in Northwest Ohio. The higher yields we have coming from that cropland, the more phosphorus is pulled out of the soil by that harvested crop. The end result of that is we see our soil tests are going down. And again, there's several lines of evidence that we've been able to put together, and we have a very high degree of confidence that on an annual basis, farmers in Northwest Ohio, farmers in the Western Lake Erie Basin in general, are pulling out about 20% more phosphorus than what they're putting down back into the soil, which is leading to these soil test levels trending down. So, Sandra, that was my message. I'm happy to answer any questions or happy to answer questions on later, but that is what I wanted to share with everybody. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Terry. We're going to do a question and answer at the end of the implementation presentations. I see there's a couple questions coming in the chat, so that's great. You can put them there or in the Q&A. Next up, we have Eric Sass, who's the H2 Ohio Wetlands Program Manager for the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. Go ahead, Eric. I see your slides.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Sandra. And Terry, that's an awesome message. I'm really proud of the work that you all have done at ODA. And, I think we're really seeing a reflection of Ohio's agricultural community recognizing its role in protecting water quality and stepping up to the task. And I think that's really cool. To the extent that we're seeing fertilizer application rates going down and soil test phosphorus levels decreasing across Northwest Ohio, that's a good thing. That's a really good thing. We have some ways to go, though, when we look at what's happening at Waterville and out in the Western Basin of Lake Erie. And, I think part of that is the landscape itself has a lot of built up old phosphorus that gets washed into our rivers and winds up in Lake Erie, driving those harmful algae blooms. And you don't have to take it from me. Ask your charter boat captain what that's like. Ask your if you're a resident who lives along the lake or you like to vacation up there every summer, what the impact of the harmful algae blooms are viscerally and why we need to keep at it. The other thing is we've fundamentally changed the hydrology of a lot of our landscape in Ohio, and in particular Northwest Ohio. The plumbing is a little different these days than it used to be. We're missing a couple million acres of what we used to have as a sort of giant shock absorber in that system. The Great Black Swamp, Lake Erie's coastal marshes, each of which are diminished by more than 90% of what they were just 200 years ago. So we see the impact of that. We see the thousands of miles of drainage ditches and the tiles under our fields. That gets the water off the landscape really quickly. And that's great for agricultural production. But we see, that water moving through the Maumee River at greater amounts than it used to be, more quickly than it used to, and all of the associated impacts. So, we view our role at the Ohio Department of Natural Resources as promoting, the voluntary restoration of critical components of those ecosystems that used to exist and in large part provided the needed ecosystem services that were missing. So we take our view as restoring habitat and doing so in a way that helps us manage nutrients across the landscape. And we take our mission very seriously. We have, over the last 6 years or so here through the H2 Ohio program, set forth by Governor DeWine in 2019 with the start of his administration, really looking at what actions can we take immediately to start moving us in a better direction in terms of water quality. And we know that wetlands are a fundamental missing piece of the landscape in Northwest Ohio in particular, but many places throughout the state of Ohio. And so we set forth, using the best available science that we could, and knowing the balance of evidence was in support of promoting the nature's kidneys aspect of restoring wetlands on our working landscape. So we've set in motion in the last 5 or 6 years, we've been signing contracts with third-party project implementers. About 203, probably a little more than that, projects we've set in motion. These are our grant-funded wetland restoration projects where we identify a partner like the Nature Conservancy or Black Swamp Conservancy, Ducks Unlimited. We co-develop a scope of work, timeline, deliverables, budget for a project, and then they manage that project and make that happen on the ground. In addition to that, Ohio is about 95% private land, and we need to take advantage of every opportunity that we can with private landowners who want to help us with our wetland restoration objectives. And proud to say that we have just as many or more projects that we've worked in coordination with the Lake Erie Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program to initiate wetland restoration or forested riparian buffer projects on private land. So sum total, you're looking at probably 450 plus individual restoration projects that have been set in motion and as a result of H2 Ohio investment and our work with partners. Increasingly, we have over 100 of those projects completed at this point, representing about 18,500 acres of wetland and associated habitat restoration or enhancement. A subset of that 18,000 is newly restored acreage. And a fun fact, if you look at the wetland acreage across the state of Ohio before and after the H2 Ohio program came about, we're responsible for increasing Ohio's wetland acreage by about 2% in the last 5 years. It's something we're quite proud of, that progress that we've made. Can't do it without our partners. Nearly 100 different entities that we've worked with to get our grant-funded projects moving forward. You see here, H2 Ohio at the Ohio Department of Natural Resources has been a statewide effort. We started off focused almost exclusively on the Maumee watershed and Western Lake Erie Basin. Had a few rounds of competitive grant funding throughout the rest of the state of Ohio. In this budget cycle, we're looking to refocus the majority of our H2 Ohio funding back into the Maumee River watershed and some of the immediate adjacent drainages. Every one of our projects looks a little different. One of the things that we recognized when we started our program was every location has kind of a unique need in terms of wetland restoration. And we decided we weren't going to mandate a blueprint for what a wetland restoration project looks like. Instead, we were going to encourage our partners to maximize water quality, and we are going to get a team of experts on the task, looking at the work that we're putting out there, carefully monitoring and measuring the impact of each one of these projects. Well, initially each one of our projects, but now we look at a subset of our projects just because of physical reality. But this team of experts, Lake Erie and Aquatic Research Network, this is a consortium of academic institutions and a whole bunch of really passionate people about the science of wetlands and water quality. We asked them to grade our homework, and I'm happy to say that from my perspective, the restored acreage that we're putting out there on the landscape, we're getting a nice return on investment there in terms of P reduction. The 2023 H2 Ohio Wetland Monitoring Program annual report has been out for a while. I've had a chance to look at a final draft of the 2024 H2 Ohio Wetland Monitoring Program annual report that will be showing up at that QR coded link in the very near future. By and large, our projects are doing what we want them to do. On average, about 3 or 4 pounds of phosphorus per acre of restored wetland per year is what these are taking up. And these are young wetlands in 2 dry years that we've looked at. So we have real results that we're seeing in the field. And another thing I'd like to highlight about that is we're not just taking that information and putting it on the shelf. We have a staff engineer who combs through these annual reports, develops retrofits for projects that are underperforming. And we are looking to tweak completed projects where we can, review plans of funded projects to make sure that they are going to be maximized for nutrient reduction benefit, and make every round of additional funding of projects more effective and more efficient, even than we have so far. This is my contact information. Welcome to track me down, and I could talk about wetlands all day long. I might have run over time as I'm looking here.
Okay, thank you very much, Eric. Next up, we have Josh Griffin. Josh is a program manager of the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency, and he coordinates the divisions for Lake Erie programs, non-point source integrated report, total maximum daily load, and concentrated animal feeding operations. Prior to his current role, he served as the project lead for the Maumee Watershed Nutrient TMDL. So Josh, go ahead.
Thanks, Sandra, and good introduction. It's fun wearing all those hats at different times, but I think those hats have helped me understand the Western Lake Erie Basin and the challenges we face up there in a unique way. So I wanted to start by kind of sharing some of the things and like where my role at Ohio EPA and Ohio EPA's role in managing Western Lake Erie, how we interact our Clean Water Act authorities and intersect between our Clean Water Act authorities and what we do to support the domestic action plan we're talking about today. So one of the big things we've done at Ohio EPA in the last several years is we developed and submitted the Maumee Watershed Nutrient TMDL and are now working on implementing the TMDL kind of in parallel and in partnership with the domestic action plan efforts and all of our sister agencies and partners throughout the state. So some kind of mentioned, we have kind of different authorities driving those things. The TMDL as a requirement of the Clean Water Act, that's delegated authority to Ohio EPA. Whereas, with Domestic Action Plan, we're working with the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. The TMDL is more focused than the Domestic Action Plan. We're very focused in that project on the Western Lake Erie Basin, and the Domestic Action Plan has come with broader statewide strategies with some emphasis on managing hypoxia concerns in the Central Basin as well. The Maumee Watershed Nutrient TMDL kind of directly drives the implementation of point source permits. So our wastewater treatment utilities receive loading limits in the TMDL that are then implemented directly in their permits. And the domestic action plan generally works more in a voluntary space and promoting voluntary actions and coordinating the regulatory authorities of agencies to kind of focus them on that common mission. At the end of the day, there's significant overlap because we're very focused on harmful algal blooms in the Western Lake Erie Basin, and we have a plan to reduce phosphorus that is aligned between the two project areas. The TMDL, again, it was approved in late 2023. And we've kind of hit the ground running with implementation there. Kind of really I shouldn't say we hit the ground running there. We've kind of continued and accelerated implementation efforts with work we're doing in Ohio through H2 Ohio and other efforts. And as part of our efforts to kind of track implementation of the TMDL, we've committed to developing a biennial report. So every other year, we're going to release a report kind of focusing on the Maumee and talking about where we're at. And within the TMDL report, we kind of thought about, well, how do we really think about tracking implementation? We spend a lot of time doing work, and what we wanted to try to convey is that work is really supporting change in the watershed above it, and that we see that change in different ways. So we heard a lot from Eric and Terry about all the work that they're doing through H2 Ohio at ODA, ODNR. And that's really kind of a foundation that drives water quality changes. But we also heard from Terry that we're seeing some of those changes on the landscape. So as we kind of move up the levels, like if we look at measure the landscape, so these soil phosphorus levels, we can track those. We can look at what farmers are doing, how they're behaving, the types of BMPs that they're implementing in their operations, how they're interacting with programs, and we get some information on that from from surveys in the watershed. And again, looking at not just the soil phosphorus levels, but they align with, as Terry was showing us, trends in manure and commercial fertilizer application in the watershed being surpassed by what we're removing by the crops harvested each year. So we're seeing those intermediate indicators. We're continuing to do research. Eric highlighted some of the research being done on wetlands. We're seeing a lot of research at the edge of field sites that USDA ARS has that's helping us refine our strategy, focus our efforts, and do a better job moving forward. We also have a very robust network of water quality monitoring gauges in the watershed. And what we're starting to see in the watershed is that there's some reason to be optimistic. We're starting to see trends that we saw going up that fueled the resurgence of harmful algal blooms in Western Lake Erie Basin, starting to show some indication that they're declining, especially with dissolved reactive phosphorus at the Waterville monitoring gauge in the Maumee. We continue to make sure that in Lake Erie itself, we have a robust understanding of what the HAB is, where it's going to be, how to manage it while we work on addressing it long term and making sure that we make progress towards diminishing its impact on us. Also, so I should just to highlight linked here. So we have this image as part of our biennial report, first one released late 2024. The QR code here on the page will take you to a story map. That story map kind of gives you a little more detail, allows you to kind of drive into some of the data, look at where projects have happened, what things are doing in an interactive way. I did want to highlight a little bit of the role of our non-point source program at Ohio EPA in watershed planning and in implementing best management practices in the watershed. So we have through the TMDL and within the DAP, we have identified targets for our watersheds to meet the goals of both the Domestic Action Plan and the Maumee Watershed Nutrient TMDL. And to kind of bring those down to a smaller level that's maybe more tactile for local planners, be that a county soil and water district, city or municipality or other local partner. We develop non-point source implementation strategies. And we have 160 in the Lake Erie watershed as a whole at this time. And really, we've emphasized work in the Western Lake Erie Basin. And in the Maumee watershed, we have 87 approved plans, and that's of 186 HUC 12s that are all or partially in the state of Ohio. We have 10 more that are currently under development. So we've seen a lot of work from our local partners to kind of think strategically about how to address water quality problems. And within those plans, they're intersecting both local water quality challenges that may be in their streams locally, but also thinking downstream and far field out to Lake Erie. So there are the targets for small watersheds that are part of the domestic action plan. They're tied to the watershed targets for the Maumee and the TMDL, and we're using those planning targets for Lake Erie within those documents. So we have all of those linked through an interactive map. I put a link to that map on the webpage. And if you drill into that map a little further than what you can maybe see on the screen here, each watershed that's shaded has a NPSIS plan developed. But if you mine in a little farther, zoom in on a watershed and area, you'll see additional dots pop up, and those are going to represent individual projects that we've completed in that area. And we're implementing those projects through GLRI funds, Section 319 Clean Water Act funds, principally at this time. Right now, we have about $10 million in awards under management in our non-point source program, and each year we deploy about $2.4 million worth of funding of our GLRI, or of our Clean Water Act Section 319 funding. I dropped a link in here of what I thought was a very interesting project that we were able to fund through through GLRI. In the city of Archbold, where we've kind of looked at ways where we can kind of stack practices at the edge of an agricultural field to process, reduce the rate and rate of runoff, and provide some treatment at the edge of an agricultural field through wetlands and other management practices. So an interesting one to check out. I would encourage anybody to take a look at our map and see the types of projects we're doing with Ohio EPA's efforts. Another highlight is following the Maumee watershed nutrient TMDL, we had a waste load allocation for all of our point sources in the Maumee River watershed. But 39 of those really made up the vast majority of the phosphorus discharged in the watershed from our point sources. And to kind of ensure and facilitate the implementation of the waste load allocation for those facilities, we developed a general permit, and that permit was issued final within months of us completing the TMDL in 2023. So our first full year of data was collected last year in 2024. And we were excited to see that performance of our wastewater utilities across the board generally tends to be very good, and we're working consistent with our goals and our strategy to kind of recover Lake Erie with good performance from our wastewater utilities. And I think this is my last highlight is, as we've worked with our outreach with the watershed TMDL, I think we get some questions like, well, what is the Maumee? What is the Maumee in Ohio? What does it look like? So we have a lot of this detail and data kind of sprinkled throughout the TMDL report. Most of our outreach following the TMDL has kind of been focused on, well, what are we doing? But we saw a need for something that says, well, what is there? What is the Maumee watershed? So pulling together some important and kind of key statistics as to why we're focused on it. It is a small portion of the water going into the Western Lake Erie Basin, but a much larger percentage of the phosphorus load. It's the largest direct tributary to Lake Erie, and it has a high percentage of agriculture, but also a substantial population within it as well. And So this graphic's out there. Put the QR code here so you can kind of link to it if you're trying to share information or understand, what is in the Maumee watershed. How does that drive what we're doing and our strategies to address and better manage nutrients in the watershed. So QR code here will take you there. Link will take you there as well. And that kind of wraps up what I had for today. Thanks, everyone.
All right, thanks, Josh. All right, we're gonna take a little bit of time here for questions that have come in on these portions of our presentation. I see questions in the chat and also in the Q&A, so let me go through this. The first question is from Peter Hess, asking Terry if you can share the calculations. I know, Terry, I believe you have Peter's email. If you guys could communicate about that. I don't think there's anything you need to say about that if you would like to.
Yeah, I can. I got the email from Peter, and thank you for the question. The one thing I will say is I was very careful that these are ODA's estimates, and one thing that's got to be recognized in trying to understand or estimate or model any of these phosphorus reductions is that anytime we talk about a reduction, it implies that we have an understanding of what was going on before. And one of the biggest challenges in making these estimates is that ODA, we don't have a clear understanding of what the implementation and what the application of these practices was before H2 Ohio, and that makes one of these making these calculations or these estimates pretty difficult to do. So there's certainly a lot of improvement that can be done in there, but that is why at ODA we've been focusing a lot on what the trends are with fertilizer sales in Northwest Ohio, what the soil tests in Northwest Ohio have been doing over a 5, 10, and 20-year period. And those trends would inform some of what we have on the correct direction on what we have for the overall phosphorus application, nutrient application in general. The other thing that's awful hard to track in these estimates is when we look at a time frame of 10, 15, 20 years, certainly changes in weather patterns and runoff from the watershed is probably one of the largest drivers of loads and losses from that area, from the watershed. And trying to fold that into the modeling or the estimates gets to be very difficult, but can certainly follow up with some of these questions via email later.
Thanks, Terry. Next question is from Kingsley Kanjan. With the current rate of reduction in phosphorus, have you thought of predicting reduction for future years? And if yes, do you have an idea of what the outcome will be?
So it's kind of a great follow-up question to what Peter's was. Here at ODA, if you think back to when H2 Ohio started in 2020, we really did not have an existing program delivery system where we could track all the different parts and pieces. So what I'm getting at is the first couple of years of our H2 Ohio delivery, our data systems that we had built prior to H2 Ohio did not allow us to track every practice at the field level. And just to give you a feel for the amount of data that I'm talking about here, currently we have about 1.8 million acres enrolled up in Northwest Ohio across 24 counties. The average field size up there that we've tracked through our data that we have is it's about a 40 acre per field average. And if we look at that, that's data and that's individual data to try to track on 45,000 different fields across 24 counties over the years. So that said, we didn't have the tools to track all of that data and what practices were happening on what field at that point in time. Here in 2024, we implemented some contract management software as well as nutrient management planning software that allows us to do a much better job of that. So we're looking and hoping that we can start to look at reductions at the field level, practice delivery at the field level, that will allow us to do a much better job of modeling what the impact is and what the edge of field reduction is for nutrient sediment losses, as well as to start to look in the future. But currently, with the information and the overall data that we have, we don't have enough data of what was happening before, and we don't have specific enough data for our early years of H2 Ohio delivery to make those kind of assessments. But we look to move into that arena with the better quality data that we've been pulling together and been tracking since 2024, 25, and now beyond.
Okay, the next question is from Sandy Bin. Great that commercial fertilizer phosphorus use is going down. What about manure and the increase of over 100,000 unpermitted cattle in the Maumee watershed? For soil samples, how many of those are on fields that have confined animal manure applied? And how does the soil phosphorus in fields with commercial phosphorus applications compare with fields with confined manure applications?
Yeah, and unfortunately, I don't have specific data at my fingertips here, at my disposal here, to discuss the unpermitted cattle operations or specific soil test levels associated with commercial or manure application. But I can speak to some general trends over time with manure nutrient content and the impact of historic manure application. And to the question, it is a fair question. I think in the past, when we looked at livestock operations, when we looked at historic manure applications, especially with the awareness that's been in that we've had going back 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, certainly in the past, there's been a lot of high soil test fields associated with manure applications and the over application of manure. I will say, though, over the last 25 to 30 years, there's been some very significant shifts in the industry and trends in the industry that would say we're going the right direction in better management and better overall approach to manure management. And I guess what I'm getting at is there's been several feeding technologies that were initiated in the late 90s. And the one specific that's really applicable to the Maumee watershed, to the Western Lake Erie Basin, is some of the advances in the use of phytase in feeding. And phytase is a feed additive that came onto the market in the late 90s. Specifically, it deals with and is fed to both swine and poultry. And what we have seen, and we looked at the phosphorus content, or essentially the phosphorus yield from 1,000 finishing swine, or say from 1,000 head of turkeys or 1,000 head of laying hens, we have seen a dramatic reduction in the phosphorus content in the feed, as well as a dramatic reduction in the phosphorus levels of the manure excreted by those animals. And looking at some of the data that we have going back to 2010, and looking at the Grand Lake data from some of the livestock operations there, I can, from memory, can speak specifically to the swine, where we have seen a drop or a reduction in the phosphorus content of swine manure of 25 to 40% over those years. Why is that important? It's important because the less phosphorus content that you have in the manure, it means that you need less acres to utilize the nutrients in that manure, and it makes the overall application economics work out a little bit better. All that to say is I think we're in a much better situation in general now to appropriately manage the manure. If we look at the historic manure management and historic manure application, where we had a lot of really, really high soil test fields, a lot of those sites were associated with integrated operations from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen now, but we have seen some vast improvements overall in the nutrient management and manure management and application. But the specific numbers, I don't have those at my fingertips.
Okay, thanks, Terry. I'm going to jump over to the question in the Q&A from John Bratton. Can Eric comment on the rate of new tile drain installation as this offsets wetland restoration to some extent? Is ODA or ODNR tracking this?
Hey, John, nice to hear from you. Certainly, as I alluded to in my prepared slides there, speeding water off of the landscape can work at odds of our H2I objectives for sure. But we also have to recognize the critical role of tile drainage in being able to farm well in Northwest Ohio. So, we take a constructive view of that, and if we can get that tile drain to flow into a structural practice like a restored wetland, uh, saturated buffer, something along those lines, I think we can get a win-win out of that situation. If folks are willing to think creatively, um, we have drainage improvement projects that come across for approval at the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. And in recent years, we've been following up on some of those and saying, hey, can we incorporate some water quality practice into this drainage project? Drainage improvement and a water quality project do not have to be different things. They can be one and the same if we're willing to think that way. And we have some good examples of where we've worked productively with folks that want to do a drainage improvement and deliver a water quality outcome. All that's to say, I still see plenty of tile that goes in that maybe doesn't meet that definition. Do we track that at ODNR? I think the answer is no. I'm not sure about ODA.
Yeah, Eric, I would agree with your sentiment and looking at the same types of practices. That said, just like ODNR, we don't track it. We don't have the authority within revised code to require reporting or tracking that.
I am going to add a little piece on there, which is to say that the Ohio Lake Erie Commission has a small amount of funding through H2 Ohio to do some of the research work that backs up the work being done in H2 Ohio. And so we did put some funding towards looking at the Maumee watershed, and the University of Toledo did do some work with remote sensing, looking at tile drainage density over 3 very specific time periods. So some of that has been looked at, but again, I don't think that we have projected that into the future. The data are available through remote sensing, but it's not specifically being tracked by our agency either, but we have looked at it. Let's see. So next comment, Pete Hess. Think about the numerous situations in Ohio. One mitigation measure doesn't need to fit all. Consider a bifurcated mitigation strategy, one for the Maumee River watershed or Lake Erie Basin, and a separate strategy for less impacted parts of Ohio. Terry, I don't know if you want to speak to that at all as far as ODA's programs. I think that what Josh was trying to say was that we definitely look at the Maumee Basin from the TMDL perspective with a very focused look, but I don't know about the other program.
Yeah, well, I think the vast majority of what ODA's focus has been in Northwest Ohio on row crop agriculture, and certainly agree that one solution does not fit all. That said, if we look on the agricultural side, if we look at the Western Lake Erie Basin in total, whether it be the Maumee River watershed, or we look at the Sandusky or the Tippin River, the agriculture and the land use is very similar across those landscapes. And what ODAs decided to do early on in H2 Ohio was to try to get to a very large footprint with the overall phosphorus reduction goal that we had, 40%. We knew that that was going to take a lot of acres, and we needed to identify practices that were applicable across a very broad swath. Our internal estimates and our internal assessment of what was going on, we didn't think that this was being driven by discrete losses from a very few select high soil test sites. We've been able to confirm that here in the last couple of years that was the right tact, or the right part of that. Given the overall fairly low high soil test fields that we've identified here in the last year. But that said, we certainly look at what we're doing across the Western Lake Erie Basin. Our agriculture there is fairly consistent. The practices will all take the loss of sediment, phosphorus, and nitrogen in the right direction. Fully agree, though, that the impact is going to be variable depending on the soils, depending on the crop rotation, depending on the landscape.
All right, thanks, Terry. Question from Sandy Bin. The watershed plans have limited information on permitted and unpermitted CAFOs, manure generated or applied, etc. How do you consider phosphorus runoff additions to the watershed?
So I'd say I think our watershed plans really excel at thinking about where we can place structural practices on the landscape. So thinking about how water moves, where it flows, and whatnot. And that's where the non-point source implementation strategies, when you start to kind of zoom in on the landscape, we don't necessarily have data that is as refined regarding nutrient management. Most of our nutrient management data kind of gets filtered up to a county or regional level. There's kind of specific Ohio revised code and also with the federal government, NRCS, and whatnot, they have limitations on how refined of a scope they can share data at. So we're often not interacting with producers to think about how they implement, traditional agronomic practices with those plans. So nutrient management, cover crops, tillage practices, those types of things. What we're often looking at is, where can we place structural practices? Because that's where our funding programs become a strong asset to watershed implementation. So I guess the answer I would say is it's kind of short of having really good information at that scale. We're focusing on what utility those plans can add to our efforts.
All right. Next question, Sandy Ben says, animal units are less than previously reported and cattle should be divided into dairy and cattle. Question, animal numbers. I think, Josh, that's in reference to the graphic that you shared.
Yeah, so we worked with ODA on that graphic, same way we worked with ODA as we developed the TMDL. So the animal numbers there reflect both the most recent ag statistics, so the NASS survey by USDA, plus some adjustments that ODA makes for permitted facilities where maybe some of that data gets screened out again, some of the privacy concerns in the NASS, but some of that is publicly available information, so we can make some adjustments. So it should align with the numbers. We didn't want to utilize the animal units terminology in that graphic. I think that carries a bit of a nomenclature that's not intuitive to folks, whereas people can kind of maybe think about, well, how many cattle, how many hogs, how many poultry are in the watershed, and we hadn't thought about breaking down cattle versus dairy cattle. But maybe that could be something we look at in the future.
Josh, if I could, I provide a little bit of a follow-up to that. You talked about our collaboration between EPA and ODA and pulling together some of those numbers. And just to revisit, we at ODA pulled together using the Ohio or the National Census of Agriculture, what we knew to have from internal data from some of our permitting programs, as well at the district levels. The environmental working group funded some studies, and I think our overall animal numbers were probably within 10% of what theirs were. Within the different species, there's a little bit of difference, but suffice to say, within all of that, if we look at the animal numbers that we have, and we look at the manure and nutrient production from those animals across the Maumee watershed, I think it's important to remember that within this landscape, we have estimated multiple times, and we keep coming back to about the same number, about 20 to 25% of the phosphorus available in the watershed at the Maumee watershed level, about 20 to 25% of that is derived from animal manure. About 75% of what is applied is coming from commercial fertilizers. And the combination of those two together is still short of what is being removed from the soil year in and year out from the harvested crops. And that's evidenced by the soil test levels that have been falling over the last many years. And that's a trend that is documented back at least 10 years, if not a little bit further. So I think we are going the right direction. There are certainly cases and there are certainly examples where an individual farm or a smaller watershed, say a Huck 12 watershed, within that is saturated with livestock and manure nutrients. Grand Lake St. Mary's is an example of that. But if we look at it from the watershed level and we look at where we need to be, it's the challenges that we have are probably at the individual farm level. And I think in general, our trends have been going the right direction in overall manure management. So just wanted to follow that up. Sorry, Josh.
Yep. No, thank you, Terry. I think those are important points to make when we're talking about livestock in the watershed, is to put them in the right context as to what they mean for the watershed.
All right. I am going to put forward one more question. I see additional comments coming in. We will be able to follow up outside of the meeting. I do want to move forward with the next presentation, but the last question we'll take right now: are applications of municipal sewage plant sludge being followed?
I can speak a little bit to that. We have a permitting program for applying sewage sludge biosolids. So those are implemented consistent with management requirements. So where those biosolids fields is tracked. They submit nutrient management plans for those fields, and we permit those applications directly.
All right. Thanks. And we will follow up with a few additional comments that have come in.